It could not have been a more perfect late summer evening when we arrived at the farm. My wife, Laurie, and I had been planning this trip for days, preparing camera equipment, creating shot lists, and contemplating scene outlines. I had wanted to make this trip for many years, but for reasons that seem all too trivial now, I never made the time. I often thought that if I don't do this, nobody would. Now there was a sense of urgency that was compelling me to act. A chapter was closing, and I was determined not to let it slip away without preserving it for future generations, and add some degree of closure to those of us who would witness the final curtain call. As the date approached, I began to realize the full gravity of the endeavor I was about to embark upon. For well over a century, Davidsons have walked these rolling pastures, tending their herds and raising their families. And a part of that rich heritage is about to pass into history. I would have one last chance to get this right. We had stopped along the way to pick up dinner for the family, a bucket of fried chicken with all the fixins. This was always a favorite with my parents, as well as my brother Russ, and provided an increasingly rare opportunity to catch up with each other's lives. Once we had finished our meal, we spent some time reflecting on random aspects of the farm. I was knee-deep in the conversation when my attention was abruptly diverted. Laurie was prodding me with her finger and pointing to my camera. I was missing something I had not considered in my preparation. Something unscripted and pure. Something I needed to capture. This was the true essence of the farm. You see, it's not about the daily chores, from the morning and evening milkings to the endless tasks that consume the hours between. It's not about hay in the barns, the tractors, the animals, or the land. All these things are only the visual manifestations which sprang from the real life source of this humble patch of prairie. What made all these things possible was the courage, spirit, tradition, and love which dwelled in each of us who bore the Davidson name. We were the caretakers of this paradise, and it was quiet moments like these that breathed life into the very soul of this family legacy. I grabbed my camera and returned to the table. I turned the lens on my parents, leaned back, and rejoined the conversation. Then I pushed record. It wasn't until months later that I realized how fortunate I was when I pressed that button. I had never filmed my parents before, and I was capturing them in their natural element. No fancy lighting and makeup, no memorized lines, just a snapshot of daily life. A scene which has played out on this very spot since the time of my great-grandfather. Mom's initial reaction was to think of her appearance, but she quickly put herself at ease and continued to facilitate the conversation. She has always had a talent for filling dead air and maintaining a flowing dialogue in any social situation. It is her gift. But her eyes never strayed far from Dad. Their love for each other had no bounds. They were committed to each other totally, and for all their struggles, their many years together were filled with joyful contentment and a mutual adoration that still resonates within me. Dad, however, was on his downhill slide and took his position in the background, following our exchange from a distance. This was the last and possibly only video footage that exists of him. He would leave us less than 5 months after this was filmed. He was now a shell of the young man who taught me so much about life as a child. His body had taken a beating over his 87 years, but it was only in the last few that he began to succumb to the inevitable toll. When I look into his sparkling blue eyes, those same blue eyes I share with pride, I wonder how connected he still was to our world. Even so, he still lit up at the sight of his sons, and never did I feel we had lost him fully. He was living in the moment. Fragments of the past remained within reach, but his days were spent mostly within his own thoughts, struggling to keep up with the rest of the world. But because of his state of mind, the rest of the family took some comfort in the fact that he was mostly unaware of the reason I was there that evening. The profession he had inherited, nurtured, and handed down to his son had finally run its course. It was a different world now, and the small family dairy was quietly vanishing from the American landscape. My brother had tried to hang on as long as he could, hoping against hope the conditions that were conspiring against him would turn in his favor. For years he struggled to keep going, but he had finally hit critical mass. He was sinking ever faster, and this was his last, best chance to exit gracefully. It was a decision he may have felt he delayed too long in making, but I understand fully his hesitation. You don't easily walk away from your life's work, as well as the generations of toil that kept the farm afloat for all these years. I could see the weight of the world on his shoulders, even though he knew this was the right thing to do. Tonight was to be the last milking of these gentle giants. Tomorrow they would all be gone, part of a last-ditch bargain to save the farm. A government program was offering small dairies compensation for shutting down their operations and removing their herds from active milk production. But there was a cruel and heart-wrenching condition to accepting the deal. Farmers were not merely allowed to cease production. They would be forced to sell their stock, and to make sure that stock would be permanently removed from any future dairy production, they would be sent directly to slaughter. These were their final hours, and I was determined that their history and generations of service would be remembered and honored. There are lineages within this herd that stretch back to my grandfather's time, and maybe beyond. There are no records to say for certain, but it's safe to assume there are bloodlines that are at least 50 or 60 years old. When you consider their longevity in these terms, it's easy to understand that they are as much a part of the farm's fabric as we are. Pieces of the same cloth that become unraveled without each other. It's not going to be an easy task to say goodbye. Cows are nature's ultimate creatures of habit. They do not embrace change and will stubbornly challenge any attempt to force it upon them. I learned early in life that you can neither lead a cow to water nor make them drink it. They march to their own beat, and the melody never deviates. So a pair of camera-wielding strangers in their midst proved to be a bit unnerving for some of the old gals. They immediately recognized an unfamiliar face or voice and were easily spooked. So I did my best to melt into the background and let my brother manage the evening's proceedings, just as he has for countless nights before. This is his realm, and these beasts are his subjects. But as I filmed my brother performing the same ritualistic tasks I've known since childhood, a surreal sense of finality was encroaching into my consciousness. I began to realize this would be the last time I would bear witness to this time-honored family tradition. The curtain was closing before my eyes as a flood of emotions slowly enveloped me. I have charted a vastly different path in life from that of my father. I knew early on that I was destined to experience more of the world beyond the farm's barbed wire borders. As a child, I took the dairy for granted. I felt confined by the repetitive and unrelenting responsibilities that governed me. It wasn't until many years later that I fully appreciated the valuable life lessons I learned as a Kansas farm boy. They formed the foundation that molded my character and continue to define me as a man. But this foundation was now losing its cornerstone. Tonight, this old barn would fall silent, a strange emptiness hanging in the air that only the passage of time will erode. I feel privileged to have witnessed this closing chapter in Davidson history, and to have lent support to my brother Russ. I can only imagine the inner turmoil he was enduring while maintaining a calm, composed demeanor. Dad would have been so proud of him. It's just the way he would have handled it. The farm moves at a slower pace these days. What I notice most now is a sense of quiet tranquility. Gone are the once familiar sounds that filled our daily lives. Baby calves bellowing for their meal. The drone of the compressor pump signaling a milking session was in progress. The rumble of alfalfa-laden hay trucks in the summer, and load after load of corn silage racing up the driveway during silo filling time. It's a different landscape without a herd of Holsteins roaming these acres. Like a well-worn hole in a favorite sweater that can no longer be patched, there is a lingering sense of loss to the hands of time. My brother has kept a handful of cattle, unable to completely sever the cord. I suspect there will always be at least one Holstein to be found if Russ has his way. But as time continues its ever-advancing march, the farm continues to keep pace. My great-grandfather would surely have taken pride in the men and their families who carried the torch he lit so many years ago. It's been a good run. 5 generations and still counting, it lives on. A little down, but by no means out. Who can say what will become of the farm in another 115 years? I would like to think there will still be Davidsons watching over this land. This land I explored with reckless abandon as a child. This land that nurtured my evolution into manhood. This land that is forever a part of who I am. I am proud to have served my time in this family of dairymen. This always was, this will always be, home.